Hello, good people of YouTube. Mountbatten here. And today we are discussing a ship that is often forgotten about. It's so forgotten about that even when I was putting together my top 5 forgotten ships video about a month or so ago, I didn't even remember that the thing existed. And what's doubly odd is that the ship is still available and it's a free ship. Yet I rarely see it over here on the North American server. And that ship is the Tier 9 Premium Italian battleship, the Marco Polo. Now, the Marco Polo is roughly a little over 3 years old. She came out in, I think, April, May, Marchish of 2021. And she's got a couple of things that are quite interesting about her that are different from the tech line Italian battleship. So let's take a look at her and see if she really is forgotten for a reason. I do often see the ship described as one of the worst, if not the worst, Tier 9 premium or coal ship you can pick up in game. So let's take a look at her and see if she really is as bad as she is made out to be. So for starters, if you can't tell, the ship is essentially a scaled up enlarged Roma, if you will. You got the same 3 turret setup, 2 in the front, 1 in the back, 3 guns per turret. And even the armor, if you take a look at the Roma's armor and the Marco Polo's armor, it's essentially again the same but scaled up, and with some differences here and there, but overall pretty dang close. Now, the Marco Polo is different from the Italian tech line battleships in a couple of ways. One being the main battery guns. If you haven't noticed, from tier 9 on up, the Italian battleships have quad gun turrets with 15-inch guns in those turrets. It's like the Lepanto has 12 guns with 4 guns and 3 turrets. The Colombo has 16 guns with 4 guns and 4 turrets. But the Marco Polo has a mere 3 guns and 3 turrets for 9 guns total. The difference is that these are 16-inch guns and not 15-inch guns. You see, the tech line Italian battleships are forbidden from thinking about anything larger than 15 inches when it comes to main gun caliber, but here the Marco Polo gets 16-inch guns, so it's a much more standard layout for Tier 9 battleships. A lot of Tier 9 battleships have 9 16-inch guns. So off the top of my head, you have the Iowa, and then you have the, I want to say Sevastopol, the, oh god, what is it? The Tier 9 Soviet battleship, the Sovietsky Soyuz. Yes, she has 9 16-inch guns as well. But the big difference is that the ammunition for the Marco Polo, she gets AP and SAP. So that's right, ladies and gentlemen, she gets SAP 16-inch shells, which before the introduction of the Lauria was the largest caliber SAP shell in the game. And while again the Lauria has come out with 18-inch SAP shells that have a ridiculous amount of alpha, the Marco Polo still has a pretty ridiculous amount of alpha for a 16-inch shell, with her SAP shells having a maximum alpha damage of 14,100, which is a lot. And the whole thing about SAP is that it's, semi-armor piercing ammo. You don't have to penetrate to the armor like you do with AP in order to get your, maximum damage potential out of your SAP shells. You can fire at the broadside of your ship, of your target ship, I should say, and if your SAP shells can pin it, they're going to pin it and do a good amount of alpha damage. They're basically HE shells that have a negative fire chance but a higher alpha damage rating. And the Marco Polo's penetration capability of her 16-inch SAP shells is a whopping 102 millimeters. So there ain't a whole lot outside of, main belt armor that the Marco Polo 16-inch SAP shells can't pin and do a decent amount of damage to. With the SAP shells with the Marco Polo, I usually will get like at least 4,000 damage, 4,000 and change damage per shell. So, when you multiply that by 9, you could potentially do 30-something thousand damage per salvo with SAP. And I have done that before. If you run 2 ships like, like the Richelieu or it's actually a Jean bar that I did it to, where I shot them from like 10 kilometers, all 9 shells hit, and I drained 30k from the guy's HP bar. It was glorious. Now, the flip side of this is that in order to get those 16-inch sap shells, she had to give up a couple of key items, if you will. First off, the reload on these guns is absolutely mental. The base reload for 9 16-inch guns, again, not large guns for Tier 9, not small guns for Tier 9, again, your average Tier 9 Battleship caliber guns, is a whopping 36 seconds. We were 4 seconds away from a Vermont reload. 12 18-inch gun reload. We're 4 seconds away from that. 36 seconds base. On top of that, your maximum firing range is a whopping 19 kilometers base. So you have a short range, a long reload, and guess what? Your dispersion is terrible. Vertical dispersion is far from remotely being good. Horizontal dispersion ain't great either. So yeah, at 19 kilometers, your maximum dispersion is 252 meters, which is quite a lot at 19 kilometers. So the shells don't exactly stick together when they leave the barrels with the Marco Polo. Now, of course, you can say, well, yeah, I mean, you got to balance out the alpha of these shells somehow. And yeah, that's true. But there's another thing that the Marco Polo doesn't have that would greatly assist it with this toolkit, and that's her exhaust smoke. She does not get an exhaust smoke, ladies and gentlemen. Now, the exhaust smoke is a key tool for the Italian battleships because what I described here, the long reload, the terrible dispersion, and the short range is something that affects, again, the tech line Italian battleships. But they get the exhaust smoke to be able to either sneak up into main battery gun range, or they could use it to disengage when they need to, because you do have to play them closer than your average battleship because of the short main battery gun range. And that smoke screen is, again, an excellent tool for disengaging when you've, sailed a little bit too close to the sun, if you will. But Marco Polo doesn't get that. And even with a full-on concealment build on it, you have like 13, I think it's 13.2, 13.5 kilometer concealment with a full build, which isn't bad. That is a pretty solid concealment rating by Tier 9 standards. But you still got to get way closer than most other battleships do. Now, she does thankfully get the spotter plane consumable, which can get her, up over 20-ish kilometers, but that is, of course, only for a short amount of time, and with your 36-second main battery gun reload. If you don't take the reload module, that's really only a handful of shots with the spotter plane up. And while the reload module does get you down to 31 seconds, which is a much more workable reload time on these guns, you're now stuck at a 19-kilometer range. If you take the range module to get her reach out a little bit further, you have a 22-kilometer range, which is much more usable, obviously, than 19 kilometers, but is still pretty short by Tier 9 standards. So, yeah, that is the biggest downside of the Marco Polo. You have the balanced 16-inch sap. And, over the years, she has picked up, one buff. Her Sigma got increased from 1.8 to 1.9. Now, Sigma, when it comes to calculating how your shells are going to, fly all over the place, the higher Sigma rating you have, the better chance you have of those shells landing towards the center of your dispersion ellipse. And going from 1.8 to 1.9 may not sound like that big of a deal, but when it comes to battleship guns, a 0.1 buff in Sigma is a pretty big deal. And with this buff, I found that the shells tend to hit more often than not now, but it's usually like 2 or 3 shells if you're lucky. So you're going from, just washing the target with your near misses with your shells, which is absolutely infuriating in this thing when you have that long reload time, to actually landing a 1 or 2 shells per shot. I'm finding with the Marco Polo now on a much more consistent basis. I've also swapped over to I used to run the range mod because I mean, and you could even still have a pretty valid argument for running it in today's World of Warships, but so often too at higher tier, tier 9 plus, you have these games where players just don't get close to each other for over half the match. And again, close by tier 10 standards is like, well, 18, 17 kilometers. So for a good time of the match, you're kind of just selling there being useless in your Marco Polo, and you can't really get too close, because when you get spotted, oh look, this guy's way closer than everybody else, because you have to get close to use your main battery guns, and you get absolutely murdered. Other thing with the Marco Polo 2 is that she only has 69,100 HP, which is I think like the fourth or third lowest hit pool at tier 9 for your tier 9 battleships. So that's not fantastic. So yeah, now that's kind of offset by the fact that you do have good armor from the bow end. But again, when we're talking about tier 9 and tier 10 and super ships with the HE spam and the CVs and your 4.5 kilometer Italian AA, that ain't great there, Chief. Now, when I was playing Marco Polo in order to get a feel for how she's doing in 2024, I was running Sansonetti, and Sansonetti helps a whole hell of a lot. Because Sansteady, one of his talents is that when you get a kill, you get a 8% buff to your main battery gun range, which takes your 19 kilometer range, gets it out to I think just on the cusp of 21 kilometers. And then when you have your spotter plane up, you get out to just think around 24 kilometers, which that right there is a usable range on your main battery guns. And with the Sigma buff, now you can shoot at that range, and you'll be landing a decent amount of shells at your maximum range. Another plus is that the shells for the Marco Polo have great ballistics and a great velocity coming out of the tubes. They come out of the tubes at 836 meters a second for both the AP and the SAP shells. So that's a very fast shell. And again, with their good ballistics, they maintain that velocity over distance a lot better than, again, a lot of tier 9 battleships do. So aiming at range is pretty easy. And again, at range is at a maximum of like 26 kilometers if you're running the range mod and get a kill and use your spotter plane. So, yeah. But do keep in mind that this is a tier 9 battleship that has... I mean, shoot, when we talk about like the Massachusetts and how she has, not the best main battery gun range for a tier 8, and she has 18 kilometers, right, of main battery gun range, and here we are in a tier 9 battleship that has 19 kilometer main battery gun range, so do keep that in mind. So, because of that, obviously the ship can be very, very frustrating to play in high tier in modern World of Warships, because now 3 years later we have super ships, we have super carriers, we have subs. We have a lot more subs now than you did back 3 years ago before they were even fully in the game. Or I think they were still in testing. Yeah, they were still in testing, I do believe, or about to enter testing when the ship came out. It was indeed a minute ago, fellas. So many things that make playing closer, if you don't have the right tools for it, so much more miserable nowadays. So is she a terrible, miserable tier 9 premium? She can be. Oh, she definitely can be, fellas. Let me tell you, if I'm trying to get a good background match for you for this video, oh my god. There's so many instances now. Well, of course, the teams are too shy to get too close to one another, to where you are literally just sailing around going, well, I guess I'm just going to go on a cruise today, right? And you try to grab some damage before the match ends. But then you also get games like this in the background where you get, moments where you can get close. And granted, I did use all of my heals this match and such, but I did get stuff done. I got a good amount of damage, and I came, I think, second on the team at the end of the match. So that's not bad. Can't you do this consistently? If you play the ship enough, I'm sure, right? If you get used to all of her quirks and features, yeah, but the fact of the matter is, this is a coal ship. It is a free ship. And there's so many better options out there, even in just the tier 9 battleship slot, right? You got the Kearsarge, the Pommern. Those are two of the hottest tickets right now. And if you're willing to get out of the tier 9 battleship slot, you got the Napoli, right? That's a really, really good premium ship. And it's an Italian still, So, yeah. The Awami is better than this thing. I'm not a huge fan of the Awami, but for the current meta, it's a hell of a lot better than the Marco Polo. Would I say it's the worst tier 9 premium ship? I'd say it's in the running. I don't think it's, any like she's not, the ship itself is not a terrible idea. It's just that it's not suited for what goes on at higher tier. And if you find yourself getting in a lot of mid-range engagements where, your short range really doesn't matter, where you can use your good armor, because the ship does have good armor, don't get me wrong, like, it is a pretty well-protected ship, especially, angled bow in, yeah, it'll work, but the fact of the matter is that, mid-range and high tier random battles, at least on the North American server, doesn't happen too much. Maybe every, 5 or 6 games, yeah. But, again, there's other ships you can pick that do better in today's meta, again, like the Kearsarge. So, yeah, definitely not high up there on the list of excellent Tier 9 coal ships, in my humble opinion. So, I wouldn't really worry about scooping this one up anytime soon. It's pretty far down on my recommended list as far as coal ships go. If you really like the Italians, you really like SAP, and you really like large caliber SAP, get the Lauria instead. Much better large caliber SAP battleship than this thing, for sure. Granted, that is a steel ship, so, a bit taller order to acquire, but if you can, and you really want that large caliber SAP itch, yeah, get the Lauria instead. If, that's just not in the cards for you, and you still want some large caliber SAP, I mean, this is kind of the other option, but again, not something I would really stress about rushing out to pick up right away, fellas. She is better. I do think she's definitely better today with that Sigma buff than she was a few months ago. Well, not a few months ago. I think it was like a year ago that they gave her Sigma buff. So she's definitely in a better place today than she was when she came out because of that. But yeah, something I wouldn't really worry about getting right away, fellas. So let me know what you guys think about the Marco Polo in the comments down below. I hope you guys have a wonderful Tuesday, wonderful rest of your week. And I hope to catch you guys in the next one.